I want to talk about the Gothic. So, Gothic literature became very popular in the 1800s, 1900s, and Gothic literature focuses on the idea of good versus evil, but mostly on the idea of finding kind of that horror within normal life. So we have the word Gothic, and then two other words that you're going to see frequently in regards to that are the sublime and the picturesque. So when we look out over a landscape and it's rolling fields and everything seems calm, we get this kind of pastoral sense, or there's pastures and a return to nature. That's picturesque. That's something you could quite literally take a picture, paint a picture of, and people will be like, oh, that's so nice. Then we have the sublime. Think mountains, ocean. It's still beautiful. It's still something that you would look out at and be like, this is amazing. But there's also a sense of not just awe, but kind of dread or fear, or a sense of feeling very small. And this is because these places are dangerous, particularly in the time in which these are being written. The ocean is terrifying. People go out to sea and never come back. People hike into the mountains and freeze to death. You have mountains between different countries that seem impassable, and that's the world in which they're living in, and we still do. Who hasn't stood on the edge of the ocean and looked out and just thought about how small you are and what the meaning of life is? That's the sublime. It's this awe-inspiring landscape that makes you really think about things. And with the Gothic, they're going to take places like that, places of isolation, and you're going to be in the middle of the mountains, you're going to be out at sea. In Frankenstein, you quite literally have both of those things, where we have an expedition out to North Pole and you have them stuck at sea in all the ice, and then you have Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster who are out in the Alps, who eventually end up out there as well. But they're these kind of scary and isolating landscapes where you don't necessarily have the help you need, and that's terrifying to you. The other thing about the Gothic is that there's a fascination with old buildings, particularly religious buildings, so abbeys, cathedrals, things like that, and then castles as well, but kind of this crumbling away of it, that we're moving out of that time and into our age of enlightenment and reason. So we're moving into the Victorian era, we're moving into realism, and melodrama and all of those literary time periods, and we're moving away from the times of knights and ladies and chivalry, also of religious, where pretty much the only focus is on religion and morals, and then we're moving into this kind of new realm, which is an in-between realm, where you have the awe for the old things that have happened, and then you're moving forward into the new things. Now, there are very stereotypical things that have to do with the Gothic, and honestly, when it came out, many people kind of threw it into the pile of trash literature, so much like you would have like romances and things today. It was just considered not real literature. We've since gone through and just made it its own literary time period, but it was often written either by women for other women, or it was written by men, but about taboo subjects that you wouldn't want to talk about, like a monk who's in love with this woman and has crazy dreams about being with her, and that kind of thing is not something you would want to be writing about during this time, or not socially acceptable to be writing about during this time. But also everybody read it. So think tabloids and things like that. People criticize them. People say, oh, that's fake news. Oh, we shouldn't be reading this trash, but then people do. And so the Gothic is kind of like that. Now, you're going to be introduced to several Gothic texts. So you have the option to read Frankenstein or Wuthering Heights, both written by women, both dealing with isolation and what makes someone a monster, what makes someone a good person, nature versus nurture, those ideas. But before we move into that, we're going to be reading Henry James's Turn of the Screw. And he doesn't normally write quote-unquote ghost stories, but you're going to see many of the elements of Gothic literature presented in this short novella. So we have a loss of innocence, we have an old building, we have death, we have potential ghosts, potential possession, we have children. That's the other thing that you should be warned about before reading Turn of the Screw. This is when we start to talk about some of the issues that we wouldn't be talking about before. So if you get a creepy vibe around domestic abuse or around child abuse and things like that, yes, those things are going to start to come up in literature. People are going to start to write about those things, not as openly as they do now. So it's much easier to just say things like corruption and things like that. But anyway, if you get kind of these vibes or creepy feelings, that's definitely intentional. You will also notice that the book is very short, but a little bit hard to read. And that's because we have very long descriptions, punctured by quick dialogue and things like that. You would see that same type of structure. The words and things like that would be different, but that same kind of structure from something like Stephen King, because it's building suspense. So it might be like, oh, we're still just walking down the same hallway. But that's how we create suspense. In movies, it's the music that's happening while you're walking down the hallway. Instead, we have these long, rambling sentences and then punctured by quick sentences that draw our attention to that. So, oh no, there's a ghost, and then we focus on that. So that's your introduction for Turn of the Screw.